I just wanted to run through some of the current options we have for bushings on the S2000. Starting with the spherical bushings, you can run these, but you run the risk of having to rebuild or replace some of these because if you look closely, none of these have dust boots. And over time, as these bearings wear, since this is metal on metal contact, you're looking at wear similar to ball joints, and actually even more aggressive than a ball joint because these don't have any sort of lubrication or protection. So as dirt gets trapped in between these bearing surfaces in each one of these bushings here, you're going to get wear, and then eventually that metal on metal contact will wear to the point where these get sloppy and will start clicking and clunking and whatsoever. So these will probably feel the best, but these require extensive maintenance. I mean, I guess this is a good option if you're solely using your car as a track car and not really seeing harsh conditions, but I would definitely not run these on a street car or a hybrid car where you're running on these at the street and the track. The other option is energy suspension. I've heard good things about these, but you have to reuse the outer bearing or outer bushing shells from the OEM bushings. So as you're pressing these stock bushings out and having to reuse those bushing shells, you run the risk of deforming them, and if you mess up any of the shells during the installation process, you're going to have to buy a new OEM rubber bushing and replace the shell or inner shell with the poly insert. So that's not really the greatest option either. I don't know why they just didn't machine these so they slide right into the arms itself and not having to run that outer race itself from the OEM bushing. If you want to go the baller route, they have the spoon full bushing kit, and these are just hardened rubber essentially. If you look at the compliance bushings, they have a solid fill. If you look at the stock compliance bushings, they have little cutouts and they're a lot softer. So these are similar to the Hardrace bushings, but they are very expensive. So if you want to stay rubber, I guess this is an option, but I believe the Hardrace bushings are about $900, something like that. There is the Prothane option, which is a good option because you don't have to reuse the outer bushing shell from the OEM bushings, and these slide right in. The main issue, from what I've been reading online, is the upper control arm bushings. So essentially this group here and this group here in your upper A arms, they're fairly weak around the outer edge, and they like to deflect and deform when you're under heavy braking. So a lot of people have reported they've installed these upper control arm ones from Prothane, and under heavy braking, the car gets all squirrely and starts to dart right and left. And a lot of people that go with these kits end up swapping the upper arm bushings to either another brand or they'll use some combination of different brands. So as a full kit for $400, it's pretty good, but just plan on replacing those upper A arm ones with better option. And that leads me to the last bushing option is in Powerflex. These are pretty good. These are the option that I went with. So if you look at the diagram here, you can get the sway bar mounts. I didn't get too crazy with my kit, and there's a lot of bushings in the rear that people don't realize too. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 in just the rear itself. So as you're piecing this together, I decided to opt out on the sway bar ones because I'm gonna probably be upgrading my sway bars eventually, and they're gonna be a different diameter. But the full kit ran me I think about $450, $500. But I've heard a lot of really good reviews on these, and I've also run these on my BMWs with the front and rear control arm bushings and have had some pretty good luck. They seem to do pretty well as far as squeaking goes because they do have a pretty intricate webbing on the inside that keeps the lubrication in there for a little bit longer. And I'm actually planning on eventually putting in Zerk fittings so I can re-grease some of the stuff because I hate poly bushing squeak. But I think as of right now, this is probably the best option on the market. I am not endorsed or paid by Powerflex, but I do have experience with them. And at the end of this video, you'll also be able to see my final thoughts on or initial driving impressions of these as well. If your caster adjusters haven't been touched in a long time, I don't know if I would go too crazy with this set because it's $200 just for this. But if your caster adjusters haven't been touched in a long time, there's a high chance that the sleeve and this piece are seized together and they break. So I would plan on getting a new set of these if they haven't been touched in a long time or greased. And make sure that when you are putting your compliance bushings in, that you do grease this a little bit because it does help with that corrosion. These bushings sit essentially where all the water and dirt and everything gets kicked up from the front tires, and they land eventually in the crevice between here, and that's what causes corrosion. So just be mindful of that. There is the Hardrace option, but what I've been hearing right now is it's tough to get a hand on getting these shipped to you, and they're also almost as expensive as the spoon ones, and they are rubber, so they won't squeak, but they will have more deflection than a poly bushing. If you live in a hot climate like I do, these rubber bushings don't last at all. Hot and dry climates, the rubber will start to crack and deteriorate probably one or 2 years of use. So it's a lot of money to spend on a rubber bushing. You can get probably a full OEM set, almost the same price right now as well, if you can even find all the parts. But just kind of wanted to run through the options before the installation and yeah, kind of go from there. I also opted out on I think it's number 6 in this diagram and 16. There's the shock mount ones. Mine were in pretty good shape, so I decided to skip on those ones. I think the Powerflex ones right now are probably your best bet as far as reliability, longevity, how well they're made. They do make so they have a street version and the black series, so a little bit firmer on the black series if you're just running a street car, and they're a little bit more expensive, but those are your options. Then for the differential mounts, because I was going to be doing those at the same time, I ended up going with these Innovative Solutions mounts. They were actually surprisingly the cheapest option out of all of them, and I heard fairly decent reviews, except for there was one person where I think they messed up and put the wrong inner bushing insert into the front, and this hole was actually too small to fit the bolt through, the stock bolt. So mine actually look correct, but we'll see when I actually go to install them. And they have different durometers, so if you look at, and I actually kind of separated out by power level, which is cool. But yeah, there are billet versions of these, and there's the Hasport ones, but they're all very, very expensive. I think this was the cheapest option. Had decent reviews, so I ended up rolling with these ones. For the diff bushing install, it was fairly straightforward. Just a couple tips here. Just make sure that the front diff bushings, they are directional, so most of them come with arrows on them, and mine, in my case, the arrows were facing towards the rear of the car. And for the rear section, your life will be a lot easier if you remove the exhaust and sway bar. Next thing I did was all the upper control arms because they were all the same diameter, and I used a combination of wheel bearing tools and impact sockets and threaded rod, as you can see here, to remove those. They are pressed in from the factory and they are very difficult to remove. You could also use, I guess, an air impact. You could try to burn them out and then cut the outer sleeves, I suppose, but it's just going to be a little bit of trial and error. So if you look at what I have there, on the left hand side is the wheel bearing tool, on the right is the socket, and just figure out what diameter inside and outside to be able to press that bushing in and out. But a little bit of trial and error, you'll get something that'll work. Here I'm marking my camber adjusters with a paint pen to make sure everything goes back together and the alignment's still good after. As a quick clip of doing the disassembly, I started with the rear toe arm and I dropped the lower control arm after that. Just the order of operations was a little bit easier. And then I had to use a ball joint separator on that and the lower arm as well to remove all those. They were stuck on there pretty good, pretty old. I should probably end up replacing those ball joints too. Here I'm using a 1-inch socket adapter and another random piece I had laying around the garage to press out the bushings in those rear toe arms. Went pretty smoothly. Just want to show you what I use for those. And here I'm just assembling the new Powerflex poly bushings, and just make sure you put a bunch of grease on that sleeve like shown here, and you put some grease on the outer part of the bushing too where it contacts the vehicle itself, or else you'll get some squeaking over time. Here I'm pressing out the front of the lower control arm in the rear, and all I really had to do was press on the inner bushing sleeve and it came right out. So the outer bushing, this is the hardest part of the entire job. You have to cut off first the outer retainer, and then you can finally get to pressing out the bushing itself. It's a two-step process and it's very difficult. So here's a quick clip of all the rear bushings installed, inners and outers, and then the toe rod. The AP1 and AP2 actually have two different part numbers for those, so make sure you know which one you're ordering. So for this job, you're definitely going to need an air hammer and a press and that ball joint kit like I showed in the first clip. Without a combination of those tools, I don't think you'd be able to get this job done efficiently or easily. It is a very involved process, and just take your time and make sure when you're pressing stuff in and out that you don't ruin the control arm itself. And take your time, measure the diameters of everything of when you're trying to push bushings through, and see what sockets you have available, and if you need to sometimes custom make something. I've even seen people throw a metal sleeve on a lathe to make their own press tools, but don't have to get that extreme. I had stuff laying around in my garage that I made it work, but overall I think it wasn't too bad of a job. It was like 2 days worth of work, probably like 8 hours ish total. But yeah, just take your time, and the results were pretty good. I'm gonna do a separate video reviewing how the bushings feel and everything, but I actually had installed the diff bushings beforehand and went for a drive, and those themselves made a pretty big difference from transient throttle, and I was pretty happy with those. So I will do an updated video, probably a point of view driving video of the bushings, so stay tuned for that. So thanks for watching. Hopefully this was helpful, and subscribe for more.